We were trolled. We had our social media manager coming to us and saying, I've never seen anything like this before on the internet. And I'm afraid it was quite a dystopian picture that I painted. We'd stripped a lot of funding away from quality content makers. And we have systems that are set up for discrimination. Female creators, female business people are saying, well, actually, my reach is much lower than that of my male counterpart. This profile quite quickly started getting served self-harm and suicide content.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Harriet Kingaby, co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network. Harriet's career has been focused by the twin lenses of communication and sustainability. Having graduated in environmental science from the University of Birmingham, she spent 3 years with the Energy Savings Trust before spending a similar period at the pioneering sustainability communications consultancy Futera. Since then, she's steered a path through the worlds of communications, academia and third sector organisations, but always to a drumbeat of a serious and applied social conscience. From Ogilvy and Media Bounty to ambient and creative for climate, Harriet has built a career navigating the sometimes fire and ice domains of commercial communication and social and environmental impact. Since 2018, she's been co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network. The network brings together more than 200 brands, agencies and civil society groups with the goal of building an advertising industry that works for everyone. I first met Harriet in autumn last year when I heard her talk at a conference called ERA 26, with ERA short for Effective and Responsible Advertising. The event was created and hosted by the media and marketing consultancy Ubiquity. Her lecture at the Royal Institution in London was titled Integrity in AI, a theme that we've touched on more than once on this podcast. It's great to have you with us today, Harriet. Welcome to Data Malarkey.
Hello, Sam. It's brilliant to be here as well. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
Well, first off, can you tell me if that's a good narrative of how you got to where you are today? Is there anything I've missed out or got wrong? This is your chance to put the record straight.
Brilliant. I often say when I'm talking at advertising conferences that I feel like I'm not supposed to be there because I started out my career in sustainability and in kind of climate communications. And in about 2017, I had this realization. I was part of a campaign, and that campaign received a lot of what I now believe to be bot attention. We were trolled. We had our social media manager coming to us and saying, I've never seen anything like this before on the internet. And then shortly after that, the Carol Cadwallader articles started coming out about, for example, groups gaming Google search results. We learned about Cambridge Analytica. And I remember having this moment of going, how on earth are we going to talk about sustainability issues? How on earth are we going to solve climate change if this is the information environment we are doing it in? And so that's guided a lot of my work since then. And you'll see that increasing crossover with things like advertising technology, AI technologies throughout that. So it's a really good, I think it's a really good description, but that's definitely was the guiding moment.
How very interesting. Yes, that work, that investigative work that Carol Cadwallader led has made us look at things in very different ways. Maybe we don't learn the lessons quickly enough, or we forget them as a new technology comes along. But it's really interesting to hear that was the motive cause that headed you off in this direction. Now, before we get down and dirty with data and some of the dark arts of data, as you've already been alluding to, I wanted to start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you you, and it doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about the day job. So tell me, Harriet, if you would, how do you spend your time?
That's a great question. Because I work with a lot of quite chunky topics, I really like to do things that are completely, can take me completely away. So I am a very keen tennis player, although I've messed my knee up at the moment, so that's difficult. But I think I really do like to get outside, get out in nature. I live by the sea, and there is something so calming and so grounding about being outside and being forced to be in your body. I think that's a really important thing. We are kind of creatures who can certainly I can end up getting kind of very stuck in my head, spending a lot of time thinking about stuff. And sometimes I remember someone very wise telling me years ago, you are not just a brain, you are also a body, and you've got to think about that. So anything that involves kind of physicality, I'm not very coordinated. So when I have to think quite carefully about what I'm doing, all of these things I really love to do. Spending time on the water, things like kayaking and surfing very badly bring me great joy.
Very good. I'm taken. We first met in the Royal Institution. The long-time former president of the RI, Baroness Susan Greenfield. I interviewed her for a book a few years ago, and she introduced me to a Dutch school of psychology, environmental psychology, which basically demonstrates that when we are outside, particularly somewhere big, so ideally an ocean rather than a lake, and a mountain rather than a hill, and a desert rather than a beach, but when we're somewhere big and not desky and hemmed in by all of the things that are competing for our attention, we effectively can process more information in a shorter amount of time. Time effectively slows down, and I'm completely with you. Being outside, and particularly in water or walking or running, but just being outside enables us not only to disconnect from the constant nags on our attention from digital devices, but also I often find enables us to solve some of the thorniest problems. But let's not geek out on being outside too long. Let's focus. Could you, for those of our listeners and viewers who don't know the Conscious Advertising Network, can you give us the elevator pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a network of around 200 organizations, and we are a really broad church. So we have brands, we have advertising agencies, and we have civil society groups within our membership. And we do that because we want advertising to work for everybody. Now, what that means is there are huge risks and opportunities that are consistently shaping the advertising world. Some of those are, kind of children's well-being focused. Some of those are around our adoption of artificial intelligence. Some of them are around the impacts that we're having on the information ecosystem. We're doing a lot of work with the United Nations at the moment around how advertising creates healthy or unhealthy incentives for the way that our information ecosystem is developing, and what that means for society and what that means for business. So the reason we have this broad church is that actually no one sector has all the answers. Most advertisers I meet didn't get into advertising to become human rights experts, and I respect that. But we do need to bring that expertise in. So what we do is we bring together advertisers who really understand the industry, often really understand the technology, really understand the commercial reality. And we bring in the civil society groups who really understand the problems, and they really understand, how advertising or, very large online platforms or search engines, whatever they are impacting people from a human rights perspective. And we find that we get much better solutions. We're all about solutions, by the way. We then kind of find that we can create much better solutions that the industry can get behind. And we're not a membership organisation. We are, we're funded by philanthropy, and we make work which is open source. And we do that because we want the industry to adopt these insights as quickly as possible. And we've been going for about 7 or 8 years. And in that time, we've worked with the United Nations. We've created things like our guiding principles, which are really kind of practical documents which allow organizations to really structure the change that they want to make. And at the moment, we're really championing this idea that advertising media should be transparent. And we're doing that because actually, my background's in sustainability. Supply chains are not that sexy, but if you look at the sustainability journeys over time, the first thing that you need to understand is what's in your supply chain. Because the minute you do that, you can start to work out where the waste is. You can start to work out where you can invest more money, and you can start to work out, well, actually, what are the problems that are there, and how do we solve them? And so our big thing with the United Nations at the moment is information integrity means transparent advertising. And on the creative side of things as well, we talk a lot about conscious creative, about thinking about what you're portraying in your adverts, who you're portraying in your adverts, and how. And we do that because obviously advertising drives a lot of the way that we think about culture, the way that we engage with culture, but also because when you Ali Hanan from Creative Equals talks about a return on inclusion, because when you think about these things and you represent people properly, there are great creative and commercial results that come from that.
Very good. Now, at Era 26, at that conference back in October last year, you introduced yourself as a sci-fi geek who's fascinated by possible AI futures. From where we stand today, do you currently feel we're headed to a light or a dark place when it comes to the AI-enabled future of commercial communication in particular?
So that talk was quite dystopian when we met, I felt necessarily so. So in my work in advertising over the years, I've always been the kind of the insights person that's going, look, these are the trends that are shaping a sector or a category. And when I look at the trends that are shaping us right now, and I look at artificial intelligence, and this specific talk was actually about the impact of generative AI and AI summaries on our information environments and what that's doing. And when I looked at it and I looked at the drivers behind it and the powerful forces that are benefiting from these changes, it made me very concerned, because naturally I'm an optimist, and as I said, I the thing that I really love about sci-fi is it just allows you to step out of yourself, out of your own world experiences, and enter into potential kind of futures where perhaps particular ideologies have come to fruition, or perhaps there's there's a bit of role playing around what might happen if. Um, and I can talk about this for a long time. I'll stop, but um, and if I allowed myself to do that and look through the lens of, well, if all of our information is kind of going to start to be filtered through platforms with particular power structures behind them, and our advertising is going to be used to incentivize people to stay on these tools for longer, what does that look like? And I'm afraid it was quite a dystopian picture that I painted, because I don't think that there are, I don't think that we are always thinking about, well, we're not thinking about what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years time. We're always thinking about, well, this is an incredible new format. This is really exciting. And I love that about the advertising industry. We're optimistic, and we love a new piece of tech, and we love a new way of using things. But unfortunately, sometimes we jump in, very, very quickly, and then we realize we've broken things afterwards. And it happened with programmatic, where we realized that actually, we'd stripped a lot of funding away from quality content makers because we weren't thinking about where that was going, and that's bad for business. We'll talk about that later. And I can see it happening with AI. And I wanted to use that talk as a bit of a polemic. Apparently, I brought the drama to make people aware of this.
Very good. Well, listen, emotional experiences are much more memorable than the kind of bland data driven, although it was indeed data driven. And one of the things that I was really interested in was you cited a Reuters study that reported that 58% of the public are struggling to identify the truth. And that figure is a figure that's getting worse year by year. Why do you, from your perspective, particularly think this is, and why do you think we should be worried about that?
Yeah, so that report was really interesting, and it says it's a study across 6 different markets, and it's quite concerning because that number is actually falling year on year. And the report itself talks about 2 massive structural changes to our information environment that they think are driving the change. And the first of which is our increasing use of social media to get news, and the second of which is the restructuring of the way that we search for information from AI. So on the first side of things, we are, I guess, newspaper brands were gatekeepers for a very, very long time. So, I think I just wanted to acknowledge that some of the trends that I'm talking about, I am very aware are not new. But I think we need to think about a few things. So, you used to buy your newspaper, and you'd have a fair idea about what that brand stood for, who was behind it. Obviously there's complexities there. But that information would be curated for you. You would have an understanding of the perspective, and those articles would have some form of journalistic integrity behind them. The content in those articles is regulated, and you can criticize that system, and people will. However, what we have entered is in a very, very new and different system, and that's a system where the creation and dissemination of information has been democratized, and that's really exciting. We've now got content creators with who are able to make and monetize content in ways and from backgrounds that we didn't have before, and that's exciting. However, we also have people who really, really understand how these systems work, and we have systems that are set up for discrimination. So I will use the example of LinkedIn. We don't just have content anymore. We have recommendation algorithms which dictate how often we see that content, what kind of content we see, and what communities we see that content from. And there is a big discussion on LinkedIn at the moment because female creators, female business people are saying, well, actually, my reach is much lower than that of my male counterparts. And when I post about issues that LinkedIn deems to be women's issues, or if I'm a member of the LGBTQIA community and I post, then my posts are suppressed. There's much less reach, and this is hugely problematic. If I go back to my sci-fi futures, the best sci-fi futures are where we're not constrained by the things that currently constrain us in society. The best and most interesting ones, I think, are where we've kind of got rid of those. We're not bound by the same kind of discriminatory structures as we are today. But on a practical thing, it means that my female colleagues, my colleagues in the LGBTQIA community, just aren't getting the reach, aren't getting the credit from the labour they put into creating posts that other communities are. It means that it means that some communities are more visible than others. And obviously that has a huge impact on our, on our information environments. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't ever so, but I am saying that it's not just about content anymore. It's also about the algorithms. And for us as human beings, we're used to, I think, to some extent, like actually having a critical view on the content that we see, but not necessarily the frequency, because we know that what changes human minds isn't just the content. It's also the frequency, the messenger, how much they trust where that information is coming from. And so that creates new issues. And we don't know what these algorithms look like. We don't have any sense of what they are. They're not transparent. And we don't know what else they're favouring. And what we do know is that the only incentive, as far as I'm aware, for these companies to kind of program into these algorithms is engagement. Now, they tread a fine line, because if you have too engaging content, they get called out for it, and rightly so. But we've reached a stage where I think I feel like that we've got a lot of content on these platforms which is harmful, and there's not enough incentive for those platforms to do something about it. And I will use the case of the Molly Rose Foundation report that we brought out quite recently. So the Molly Rose Foundation set up a profile which was designed to look like a 14-year-old girl. And they looked at Instagram and they looked at TikTok. And what they found was that this profile quite quickly started getting served self-harm and suicide content. And that a lot of that content was monetized. Now, this is hugely problematic, because the only reason that profile is getting served that content is to keep it on those platforms, so it can be served more ads. And there we have the problem, is that these platforms are not out to inform us, they're out to keep us scrolling so that they can serve us more ads and make more money for their shareholders. And it is that simple. And we as an advertising industry are unwittingly and unwillingly, I think, a part of that. And of course, if we have people who are able to game that system, who are able to either create content that flies through the algorithms very quickly to make money, or create that content to change national narratives and manipulate us as society. And we don't, we do have some regulatory powers, things like the Digital Services Act, but they don't go far enough yet. And the net impact of all of that is the quality of our information in environments is falling, and people don't know what's true or not anymore. And that is, in my mind, pretty problematic.
Indeed. Now, you talked about AI changing the way that we search. Tell us a bit more, if you would, about the no-click internet and the impact that this AI-driven phenomenon is having on those who create and distribute content online.
Sure. And this was a term that actually I learned for the talk. I was going to do the talk about something else, and I learned about this phenomenon just before and was like, I have to tell people. So, um, you know, traditional search is quite, we've all used it. You go onto a search engine, you use your search terms, you click through probably to one of the top 3 links, and you visit the site and you get your information. And all of that's changing with the use of generative AI. So now I can, particularly if I want to do complex research or searches, I can now go onto my AI tool, and I can type in, I can prompt it, and it will spit out a response that has been passed from lots of different sources. And if I want to, I can go and visit those sources, but it's quite unlikely that I will, because usually I've got my information and I move on. Or I go onto my search engine and there's a little AI summary which has passed the top links, and it gives me a little response. Now the problem with all of that is that the content creators we're not visiting their sites, we're not scrolling, and therefore they're not getting any advertising revenue from any of this. So what it effectively means is all of this revenue that used to be spread out across various content creators, across news sites, is now not getting dispersed, and you've just got your AI search summary. So it also means that you're centralizing the ability to earn money from content, and it changes the way that it changes the kind of the funding model for the internet completely. And the talk that I gave was about how this is causing the death of the open web, which is a bit of a polemic. But when you look at the data, you've got Kandar Media, who publish quite specialist publications, saying a third of their titles are going to be gone by this time by August of kind of the midway through 2026. You've got the Daily Mail Group saying that their clicks are down 89%, and you've got Penske Media, who are suing. They're the parent company of the Rolling Stone. They're suing Google over this, because they're losing so much revenue. And the result of that is that all of our information starts to get funneled through these online platforms, these recommendation algorithms more frequently, which means that these recommendation algorithms have more and more and more say over the content that we see.
It's fascinating, and I'm kind of reminded of the debate that there was when Meta, or actually it was predated Meta's existence as a corporation, but Facebook and Google were taking news media content, and they said, we're not publishers, we're merely distributing. There's no reason for us to pay. In the same way, some of the same companies or sort of investments from the same companies are now training or having live feeds from news media and from those who create and distribute content, and because you're saying, because there's no actual going through to the original source, there's absolutely no chance of those creators making any kind of money at all.
Exactly. And there are more and more lawsuits that are changing this, but you have to have, if you think about who's filing these lawsuits, it's not, it's not your recipe creators, it's not your small YouTubers, it's big corporations. So again, you're seeing this big kind of power dynamic play out, and I'm concerned because, frankly, there's not one version of the truth. There's not one, there's not a carefully curated version of the truth that only includes particular voices. And surely, going back to our AI future, our sci-fi futures, surely we should be encouraging more, plurality of voices and more ideas, and not fewer.
Well, hello there. It's your host, Sam here. Now, I won't keep you for long. If you've been inspired by what you've been listening to today, and you'd like to find out what type of data storyteller you are, why not go to our Data Storytelling Scorecard? Just follow the link to data-storytelling.scoreapp.com. That's score app with 2 P's. Answer 12 simple questions, and you'll instantly be served with a scorecard that tells you exactly what type of data storyteller you are. Now, back to the action and our brilliant guest. Yeah, I've published 3 books and have been talking and publishing not only through books, but in many different ways about the use of data in storytelling for many years. And when I think there's a class action that authors have been invited to join against Meta for the appropriation of 7.5 million books, and I was both horrified and delighted to find that they were in there. It doesn't seem to be much of a political appetite for either this type of class action from many little individual authors or even from big publishers. There doesn't seem to be much political appetite either side of the Atlantic to take on the big tech bros. I mean, I guess if we stereotype it, you look at the inauguration of the 47th president and who was there, and who was in the front row. Do you get any kind of sense? Are there any flickers in any nations or blocks of nations or approaches? Is there any flicker of optimism for the big AI platforms driving this no-click internet? Is there any flicker of optimism, or is it equally dystopian?
So first off, I wanted to start with the data and storytelling point, and just to say that, one of the things that I absolutely love about your perspective on data and storytelling is that actually, data. We tell ourselves stories. We're human beings, and we understand the world through stories. But
absolutely,
so many of those stories don't stand up to analysis. And what I really love is that when we get into the data, we find new stories and we find better ways of telling stories because we've got more available to us. And we tend to gloss over things, and we tend to kind of, we're drawn towards polemicisms in narrative storytelling as those platforms know and exploit. And actually, when we start to look at the data around this, it gets interesting because you rightly pointed out that it can feel like there's a lack of will and a lack of action. And certainly, there's been a lot of I live in the EU, and there's been a lot of headlines suggesting, that there's going to be deregulation of AI tools, and the AI Act might be stripped back, and all these things. However, the point of light that I would point everyone to is that there is also a huge number of governments who are looking at the idea of information integrity, kind of quite seriously. So the UN, Antonio Guterres, so the UN Secretary General, in I think end of 2024, released the UN Global Principles on Information Integrity. There's an amazing team there. There's a woman called Charlotte Scadden who does incredible talks where she really shows how information integrity and business, business and business are knitted together. And they released this white paper, and it was essentially about how we redesign our information systems. So it's got recommendations for policymakers, for advertisers, for platforms, for the works. How we redesign this system with human rights and in mind, and protecting the quality of information. And they call out the fact that we need quality information literally in order for democracies to function. And when we looked, it makes sense, right? And then when we look at things, it's also absolutely essential for businesses to function. So, I think the International Monetary Fund found that that GDP is suppressed for a year and a half by 1.5% after moments of severe civil unrest. So if you think about that, that's going to be something like the Southport riots, which were in part, kind of triggered by disinformation about the ethnicity and the religion of the attacker. Now that's pretty serious, and that's been the focus of, a lot of discussions surrounding the Online Safety Act. And I'll tell you right now that the site that contained the false claim had advertising on it. So that is an advertising issue. That was pulled very quickly afterwards, but, so that's instances like that are suppressing GDP, which is costing business. You've then got things like natural disasters. So the Valencia. So the IPIE. Please don't ask me what that stands for. I can't remember. But they did an incredible report where they looked at the intersection between disinformation and natural disasters, and what that meant for people and what that meant for business. And they found that in the aftermath of things like the Valencia floods or the floods at Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, you've got all of these people who jump on the conversation and they spread disinformation, and they say you can't trust rescue efforts, or actually it was, the Democrats controlling the weather, or it was, it was all of these things. And they're either doing it to make money, because that's a very lucrative time when a lot of attention is on, is on that topic. So disaster capitalism at its best. Or they're sometimes doing that to confuse and to greenwash, because they don't want people to make the link between those natural disasters and climate change. And, what's the result there? Well, when rescue efforts are slowed down, victims and survivors are, they have the things are made harder for them. And GDP is depressed again because people can't go to work. Rescue efforts are slowed. Any commercial activities in that area is getting slowed down. So from a hard business sense, that's also not good. And so all of these issues are business issues as well as being social issues. And I think that it's really, really important to remember that when we're thinking about, kind of how do we talk about them? What's the reason to act? And also if you've got entire categories who need us to solve climate change. I'll say insurance, definitely. For example, coffee, chocolate, champagne, all of these categories are going to face severe hardships if we don't do something about climate change. That also becomes a business issue. So there is this really strong kind of crossover between business and what we're talking about here. And I don't know if I answered your question, Sam. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent there.
You've answered several more questions beside, but you've definitely answered the question. One thing I'm really taken by is you drawing the line between the impact of misinformation and I completely take your point about disaster capitalism. It's the phrase that was bubbling in my mind was kind of digital ambulance chasing. That we will garner all of this attention, and because we'll garner and we'll have many more eyeballs, we'll be able to charge more for the ads, and then we'll move on to the next thing, and we may put a tiny apology that nobody will ever see. But I'm really struck by the way that you draw the lines, that you make the clear connection between misinformation, its short-term commercial impact, but also that long-term commercial impact in terms of GDP, in terms of it kind of almost unbelievable that it would slow disaster recovery. But of course it would, because people would be questioning the narrative. Is there really anything to see here? So I think you do a very important job there, and making that manifest and drawing those explicit connections. I mean, I hadn't really my only consideration before about champagne growers was that, I mean, I live in East Sussex, which is the same slab of chalk that effectively that slides down into Champagne. But the kind of the boom time and the fact that all of the champagne houses have investments to a greater or lesser extent in the southeast of England, because effectively Sussex, Hampshire, round through Essex, Kent, even up into parts of Suffolk, is champagne, but 20 years ago in terms of climate. So it's actually kind of better growing conditions. But I completely see. But drawing those explicit parallels is. I mean, would you call the Conscious Advertising Network, at least in part, a campaigning organisation? I mean, you're using the principles of campaigning organisations, but is that in part how you see yourselves kind of turning the spotlight where it needs to be turned?
Yeah, and I remember why I'd and the last question you asked me about points of light, and I immediately went into kind of like disaster capitalism. So I'll finish that, and then I'll talk about CAN, and also say this Sussex sparkling wine is amazing. We had some. Got gifted some for our wedding, and it was fantastic. So yeah, I guess so. The points of light, and I would say actually we're seeing national governments get behind the United Nations global principles on information integrity. Such a mouthful, but yeah, we're seeing this year at COP, which is going which kind of in 2025 at COP, basically there were several days that were dedicated to information integrity, and that's huge because this has not been a topic for a huge amount of time. Um, and there was a huge open letter asking for national governments to treat information integrity as something that needs to be safeguarded, and to create policy that works for that. And then there's a specific Brazilian initiative that's also looking at information integrity around climate, and that's been signed by everyone from Morocco and Chile, kind of right through to the UK and Germany. So there is consensus that something needs to happen. Information integrity impacts national security, it impacts business, it impacts, disaster recovery, all of these things. And so I think there is a growing movement that recognizes the importance of this. So that is my point of light, is that actually, whilst when we look at individual technologies, we might say, not sure that there's progress here. When we look at the topic as a whole, I think there's a real global movement. And then on CAN, well, I think we exist as when we first started up, our insight was that there was loads of great stuff going on in the advertising community, but there were gaps and that people didn't know where to start. So we'd have people come to us and go, look, I really want to make my advertising, kind of more inclusive or more sustainable, but I have no idea where to start. And so we started by creating our kind of maps of what was happening within the industry, and then pulling conversations through from civil society that we thought added value. And so the example I use is, when we first started up, we had so many conversations about hate speech, and people write me going, I don't really want to get involved in this because I believe in freedom of expression. And we said, totally get that. So do we. So we found these documents from the United Nations where, extremely experienced, clever people had spent a long time working out what the balance was between making sure that we don't have hate speech and, or that we don't monetize hate speech in the case of the advertising community. We only ever deal with monetized content. Identifying what hate speech was, working out what the red lines were, and then bringing that conversation to the advertising industry so the advertising industry could make better decisions about what they felt they could monetize and what was not acceptable. And so that's always been our ethos, is that we look for areas where there's a big industry discussion, and we look at where there is wisdom outside of the industry, and we try and bring that wisdom in so that people can make more informed choices. And this is what's happening with AI right now. There are incredible and very well developed fields of responsible AI, of ethical AI, and what we're trying to do is just make sure that the industry is aware of and using those frameworks, those terminologies, and drawing on the wealth of experience out there. Because sometimes what we do, we jump into things and then we try and kind of like recreate stuff that already exists elsewhere. Every sector does this, and it's about bringing together sustainability thinking, kind of AI and ethics thinking, advertising thinking, and human rights together, and to work out where we go. So we are campaigning in terms of the fact that we want, we want the industry to go forward. We want it to represent everybody and work for everybody. And we want it to be using the best thinking from other sectors in order to get there.
Very good. So I guess, you've mentioned it in detail there, but I guess my big question, you've talked about the points of light coming out of the COP 30 in Brazil. You've talked about UN. You've talked about your principles. You talked about industry kind of coming together. But my big question is it too late? Can we get integrity in AI, or are we all doomed? What do you feel? You say you're an optimist by nature.
I think you have to be an optimist. I think you have to be an optimist because I've got two little nieces who mean everything to me, and I can't have them in my life and not go, actually, I think we can sort this out. I think we can solve this. And like I said, getting outside, you see this incredible place that we live. And like, it will be fine without us, don't get me wrong, but I'd much prefer that other people got to experience it. Um, so I don't think we're doomed. And the purpose of the talk, the second half of my talk was practical, and I made it so I wanted people to sit up and listen, don't get me wrong. But I never believe in creating fear without agency. That's something I learned from Solitaire Townsend of Futerra. You don't tell people that there's a problem without telling them how to fix it. Otherwise they go away and they're like, well, that was terrifying. I'll just put that in a box and get on with my day. So this is where I think the United Nations global principles are really powerful, because it's a practical set of solutions. So what we've done at CAN is we've kind of translated those into something called our guiding principles. And that's, from an advertiser's perspective, what we can do to kind of think about how we spend better, think about our media spend as an investment in our businesses, but also in an information environment that will help us do better business in the longer term. All of those things. So I don't think we're doomed, but I think we have to make changes quite quickly. And what I'm seeing, which is really hopeful, is that this idea of integrity is really being taken on by the industry. It's really, I think I'm seeing that terminology popping up in lots of different things. I'm seeing lots of, really interesting interrogation into the way that we're using AI. ISBA have done an incredible, kind of framework, responsible media framework, which really includes the use of AI. And I think that we have a lot of power at the moment. So many of these tools are not yet monetized. Many of those tools have announced plans to monetize, and we know exactly what's going to happen when they do. So that we will enter the, and I love this phrase, but the cycle of enshittification, where these tools start to get made worse for you and I, to incorporate features that are going to mean that they make more money for their creators. Fine. It's mildly terrifying to look at the AI market and look at, investors suggest that and analysts say that it's a bubble. But that means they're going to want to make a lot of money very quickly. Now that doesn't bode well for us, right? We're already seeing chatbots being taken to court because they are implicated in suicide. We're already seeing chatbots, have a survival feature kick in where when the minute they try to be shut off, they're keeping users on there for longer, or using manipulation tactics. We even got examples I saw yesterday on LinkedIn of someone who suggested that Sora, the new image generation app from from OpenAI, was probably mining his phone's photographs and had placed him in his own living room in a video. Now, that could mean I haven't caught up on the analysis. That was only 24 hours ago. But I mean, that for me could mean several things. It could mean, A, that these models are doing a lot more data mining than they say they are, and that's down to the developers. Or it could mean these models are starting to bypass, the guardrails that have been put into place in order to be, to make more tailored content that they know will keep people on there for longer. So, we have to get on this very quickly. We know that as advertisers, they want our revenue. And we have to just be very, very clear about what good partnerships look like. We have to be asking, we need to know if we're going to partner with and monetize a platform, that platform has appropriate guardrails in place. And the big thing that I say is that we need to be asking more conscious questions. So this started out as stupid questions because years ago I was an ad tech journalist. Long story, but I went from the world of sustainability into the world of ad tech, and I was just so taken aback by the completely different approaches to building brands. Because in sustainability, it had all been about long term, and it had been about value and building trust. And then, in the world of ad tech, it was a very different story. And I remember doing my first interview and going to my editor and going, I can't do this. I don't know enough. I've read stuff, but I don't really know. And his response to me was, well, neither does anyone at the moment. So just ask questions until you understand, and you'll have as good a knowledge, you'll have as good a a base knowledge as anyone else. And that's what I did. And it was tough, I'll be honest, to kind of go into an interview and go, right, tell me everything. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. But it did help me to write. It did help me to write about programmatic and to understand it. And I really believe that we need to be taking that ethos into this world of AI, because trust me, I've done an AI fellowship. I spent a year working only on this at Mozilla, and I don't understand it. Like, I understand bits of it, and but every single one of us has something to bring to the conversation, because AI is such a huge suite of tools. It doesn't just cover one thing. And if you're not a technical expert, that is absolutely fine. You don't have to be. So I believe really strongly that we need to get into this space of asking questions and being all right with not knowing, being all right with kind of going, I don't get it. Because if people that are selling it to you can't explain it to you simply enough for you to understand, then they don't understand it well enough either. And unfortunately, at the moment, we're dealing with we're dealing with systems that learn from themselves. So if we don't understand it now, we are never going to understand how these decisions are being made. We are never going to understand these tools. We are never going to understand what it is we're dealing with. And that's going to come and bite us in a few years' time. So yeah, for me, it's all about not being afraid to say you don't know, and ask those questions.
Well, I mean, listen, you're pushing an open door with me. I wrote a book on the forgotten ask of asking smarter questions a couple of years back, and I was originally a classicist, and one of my I think Socrates was undoubtedly an objectionable person in many ways, but the Socratic paradox of beginning any line of inquiry wanting to find out the essential nature of anything by stating all that I know that I know nothing. Even if we do have prior knowledge, we also have assumptions and biases and prejudices that we bring, and starting. You could be the world expert in whatever it may be, but starting to ask questions based on all of those assumptions, biases, prejudice, prior knowledge is an imperfect way of operating, and I completely applaud you for your approach on, if you're going to surface the data that you need to make informed decisions, starting from a position of we know all about this is just inevitably going to end you up in trouble. Now, listen, before we close out, I just want to ask you one more question about misuse of data. I mean, you've given a holy trinity plus one from the Southport riots and Valencia floods, Molly Russell, Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. What for you is the worst misuse of data that you've witnessed during your career?
Great question. And when you send this to me, I was like, I've got so many.
Only one.
Only one. Okay. So I think so 5 years ago, I wrote this report for Mozilla, and it was looking at, AI in advertising, and I got a lot wrong. I'm not going to lie. I mean, but there was one case study that really, really stuck with me. And it really, really stuck with me because I read the paper that it came from. And then I was actually going and babysitting with my little nieces later on that night. And we were watching a film, and I was playing this idea over and over in my head. And it was a finding from a study that had been done that looked at the use of facial recognition in advertising. And there were a number of case studies that I went into this really naive, and I couldn't work out why is everyone so obsessed with facial recognition in the kind of the data privacy world. And then I kind of started reading around it more. And basically, if you have facial recognition, wherever you go, you can be tracked, because you can't change. I mean, I could stick a false moustache on and it might confuse a few people, but you can be tracked and you can be identified wherever you are. And this case study was a case study from a set of television sets. So you hang it on your wall, you don't even think about it. And these television sets had been had facial recognition technology embedded in them that could be turned on at any time, and would tell the television set who was sitting in the room, because they had identified the family's faces, and therefore could tailor the ads to the family that was sitting in the room. And honestly, that like more than anything else, more than your smartphone, your smartphone data can be bought by companies anywhere and used to identify your location. That you only need 5 data points to kind of like identify someone, back identify someone as an individual in some studies. That more than anything else brought it home to me that actually anywhere where we don't have GDPR, anywhere where our privacy isn't respected, we can be tracked in our living rooms. And when we talked about government earlier on, that's fine when we have benevolent governments, right? Fine, doing a lot of work in that sentence. However, when we don't, like, what does that say? And we as advertisers really need to think about that when we're thinking about the kind of data sources that we're using, particularly in markets outside Europe and the UK. Because we could be, and I wrote in this report, and I stand by this today, we could be aligning ourselves with the worst practices of surveillance regimes quite happily. And I'll go back to who was sitting in the room in November 2024, when we think about that. So that for me was the worst misuse of data that I've seen.
Pretty grim one. There's a growing list. Thank you so much. Now, one of the things that we will definitely include a link in the show notes to is obviously CAN's guiding principles. They're an excellent set of guiding principles from many perspectives. Can you tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find more out about you, about your work, and about the Conscious Advertising Network online and social media?
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So the Conscious Advertising Network is go and have a look at the website. It's a real kind of smorgasbord of free resources. You can follow us on LinkedIn. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So just my name, Harriet Kingaby, and you will find me. There's also a website where you can link out to podcasts and YouTube and all sorts of stuff. And that's just harrietkingaby.com. And yeah, I mean, please do have a look. I hope this has been useful and interesting for everyone.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Harriet. If only there were more people with your approach to making conscious choices, I think there'd be rather less malarkey, and there's an awful lot in the world of advertising, online advertising, and rather more data-driven common sense. Harriet Kingaby from the Conscious Advertising Network, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. If you've enjoyed this latest episode and liked what you've heard, why not subscribe and leave a review on the podcast platform where you found us? Do share Data Malarkey with your friends, colleagues, and collaborators.